Welcome, everybody, to another edition of the SERMAPod, the podcast sponsored by the Sports and Entertainment Risk Management Alliance. I am your host and the founder and CEO of SERMA, Rich Lenkov. I'm in Chicago. We're very fortunate to welcome a repeat podcast guest on our show, Dan Lust. Dan is sports and entertainment attorney at Garagos. He is also a sports law professor at New York Law School and one of the hosts of Conduct Detrimental, the sports law podcast. Dan, welcome back to our SERMAPod.
It might be the third time we've been together, Rich. So I think that's some good evidence that you and I get along pretty well. So I'm happy to join you.
Number 3. You know, at number 5, you get a jacket, Dan. So you're just a little bit over the hump. You're almost there.
I'll take it.
We're also joined by our newest producer of the podcast, Taylor Weaver. Taylor is a rising, do you call it a rising 3L, I guess, at American University, George Washington College of Law. Is that accurate, Taylor?
Yes, Rich, that's accurate. So in August, I'll start my last year of law school.
Excellent, excellent.
And I am so excited to be here. Thank you both for having me on today.
Someone who, despite her relative young age, has done a ton in the sports and entertainment law space. So we're very fortunate to have Taylor with us today. Welcome all. So the subject today, Dan, is unruly fan behavior. We've seen an uptick, it seems, in the last few years of fans behaving poorly. We're talking about fans, customers, patrons of sporting events specifically. And we've seen all sorts of wacky behavior. Just to list a few things that come to mind, there is a particular cluster of these events in last year's NBA playoffs. So last year, I'm talking about 2021 playoffs, we saw, just in the matter of it seems like a week or two, we saw a Jazz fan taunt the father of Ja Morant from the Grizzlies. We saw a Wizards fan dump a bucket of popcorn on Russell Westbrook. We saw a Knicks fan, someone in your backyard, actually spit on Atlanta Hawks guard Trae Young.
Wasn't me. It was not me.
Was not Dan, we think. We saw a member of the Celtics fan base. I'm a Celtics guy, so I don't condone this, but a Celtics fan was charged with assault, actually, for throwing a water bottle at Kyrie Irving, who was with the Nets. May not be with the Nets for very much longer. Also in 2021, we saw a Yankees fan hit Alex Verdugo with a baseball. Fast forward to this season, we saw a high-profile incident at Yankee Stadium again earlier this baseball season involving fans pelting garbage at members of the Cleveland Guardians outfield. We saw a Rangers fan. This prompted a post by you, Dan. A New York Rangers fan sucker punched, literally on camera, a Tampa Bay Lightning fan. Really disturbing event.
Not me. Not me. Let's be
yeah, not you. Recently in June, we saw the captain, I believe, of Sheffield United, a person by the name of Billy Sharp. He was actually headbutted by a fan, rendered bloody during a soccer match. And just recently, last week, we saw at the Austrian Grand Prix racist and homophobic chants throughout the stadium. So my question first to you, Dan, as a keen observer of these events is, what is causing this uptick in bad fan behavior? Understanding that you're not a sports psychiatrist, you're not a psychologist, but to what do you attribute this uptick? Or maybe there is an uptick, maybe this has happened for years and we're just getting maybe a little more attention paid to it.
So I have two answers for you, and I'm not a psychologist, but I was a philosophy major at a small union college in Schenectady. So, big brain up here. No, I'm just kidding. So I think there's two answers for it. The easy one is probably the one that you kind of alluded to, right? More attention being paid to it. In the age of 2022, we have more technology at our disposal than we had in 2021 and more than 2020 and 2019. So this stuff has happened for years, right? You can go back to those grainy videos from the 70s and 80s. There have been fan disputes. There's been fans running on the fields. There was the great imposter who was running on the fields and posing as players, right? We've had stuff like this dating back decades. But with the viral nature of our world, and everyone has a camera in their hand and everyone has a Twitter account, we're seeing it a lot more. People can capture these moments live. I know the New York Rangers one, which I was following pretty closely. Fans were walking out; they were pretty upset of a loss to the Tampa Bay Lightning, and someone just got sucker punched, and someone happened to have their phone out at the time. So a fan sucker punching another fan is, I don't know if that's necessarily newsworthy, but the video of it, I mean, I know it got millions and upon millions of hits, so there's a lot more attention being paid. So that's the easy answer. Technology is going to amplify all of this stuff. So if it was happening before, it's that old expression, Rich. If a tree falls and no one's around to hear it, does it see it? Does it make a sound? Something along those lines. Same concept with social media. Now, the second answer, I'll take your feedback on this one. This is my working theory. I think I'm right on this, but I'm happy to have it destroyed by you and Taylor, whoever else wants a piece of it. I think the captivity that we had during the early stages of the pandemic, when there were no fans at games, it created this scenario where, I think fans were so excited to get back into the arena. Maybe there was some alcohol involved, extra intake, but fans weren't allowed at stadiums for the better part of a year and change. And then all of a sudden they're allowed back, and it comes with a large uptick, even during the social media era, of bad fan behavior. At baseball games, there was, Rich, in that laundry list, if you can imagine, there's more. There's San Diego Padres fan, that I had looked into. There was a Los Angeles Rams fan, a big fight, and it coincided with the first year back to stadiums. So I think it was just fans not being used to coming back to the stadium and maybe going a little bit too hard, or their excitement getting the best of them, maybe cheering too hard, we'll say, and a lot of spats between visiting fans. So maybe that's all it was, that fans for a year weren't used to visiting fans cheering in their face, and it usually was a dispute between home and road fans. Very rare that it was disputes between fans of the same era. And then, Rich, as you mentioned, a lot of these incidents involve home fans and road players. So I think it's just that year of being away kind of lent itself to some fans that just didn't know how to hold themselves out.
Dan, what's really interesting to me and really relevant to our organization is what kind of liability do venues and teams and all sorts of people down the chain face. But I want to talk first about criminal liability, right? I mean, what are authorities doing? What trends are you seeing in reaction to these events? I know the Rangers fan, I think, was charged with assault. Many of these alleged perpetrators, in some cases, still alleged, are being charged criminally. What's that looking like?
Yeah, so there's one of two ways to handle this, right? I mean, people say one of three. Let's start at the bottom, right? If you figure out who the fan is, you can give them a lifetime ban, which is not, I know it's not your question, but that's at the lowest level. No criminal charges, slap on the wrist, go have a nice day, you're never welcome back here, right? Level two is what we kind of saw with this Rangers incident. I believe the charge was disorderly conduct. I believe it was a misdemeanor charge. That was the maximum charge that was done here. So what disorderly conduct, I guess that's what applies here. Certainly, could you call this a version of felony assault if you really wanted to? Do you want to squint your eyes? Maybe. I'm not saying that yes or no, but you could. But they charged him with what he should be charged with. It was a misdemeanor offense. The one that certainly caught my eye, which is on the most extreme end of the spectrum, is the incident that you mentioned with your Celtics, which, Rich, I imagine you following this closely. If anyone follows the history of Kyrie Irving and the Celtics, it is a checkered one, right? Kyrie... maybe if you're a sports fan, remember if they traded very low, they traded Isaiah Thomas to get Kyrie. So it was a great trade, it was a no-brainer trade. And then Kyrie went to the Celtics and, maybe he became the most unpopular Celtic in the last decade. And that culminated in a moment last year when Kyrie, is a member of the Brooklyn Nets, went to center court. Rich, what do they call that, the leprechaun? Does he have a name?
That's Lucky.
Lucky the leprechaun.
By the way, the only mascot in pro sports who has a disability and also who is smoking.
What's his disability?
He's got a cane, right? He walks with a cane, and he's also actively smoking, which isn't the greatest look, but it explains a lot of Boston behavior right there in that logo. The reason I asked, if Rich, you obviously know where I was going. The center court has an image of Lucky, so Kyrie, because he just decided to do it to incite the fans, which
Kyrie's certainly maybe not culpable in a legal court for what I'm about to explain, but culpable in inciting the crowd. He goes to home court after the game's over and steps on Lucky's face and kind of smears his foot in Lucky's face, which was very much an intentional and purposeful act. And as he was leaving and walking out the tunnel, he got, I want to say, grazed in the head, not hit, not a direct hit, by like a 5% full water bottle, which by no means looked like it hurt him at all, but it certainly looked like it made contact with him. So, I don't know, was it assault with a deadly weapon? No. Was it assault with a projectile from a high range? Yeah, it was, but like anyone with half a brain knew that it wasn't going to kill Kyrie Irving. Nevertheless, he was charged with assault with a weapon, and he was charged with a felony. And that was I think it was a young kid. It was some kid in his early 20s who was all of a sudden had a felony charge on his record, a very public arraignment. They kind of gave him the perp walk, and that's the other way to treat this, right? To treat it as some type of way to prevent recidivism, to prevent people from doing this, to make an example out of someone. So those are the three ways to handle it. Lifetime ban, right, which we saw at the MSG with the Rangers fan. Number two, right, you could charge someone with what they're actually charged with. Or number three, you give someone a pretty ramped up criminal charge, the highest possible you could conceivably charge them with. So those are your three elements there.
Yeah, so that's a great answer. And that actually is a good chance to segue into lifetime bans because, that's not something that is on its face clearly understood, I think. Why don't we talk about what that looks like, by the way? How enforceable is it legally? Because as a, purchaser of a ticket, you have certain rights. Of course, we all know that those rights are very limited, either on the face of the ticket or these days, on the waiver that you sign inherently that you check off the box when you buy a ticket. So how enforceable are these lifetime bans, both legally and maybe as importantly, practically? Like, what are teams doing to enforce lifetime bans for the small amount of times they're doing it?
So that's the question, right? We don't live in a world. I remember one of my favorite movies back in the day. There was an element of, I think it was, people probably know the example from Minority Report, where there was like retina scanners and you could kind of track where someone was going at every moment of the day. We don't live in a world that's fully operational on that clear technology with retina scans.
Right.
So and probably for good reason that can't get tracked like that. But I don't really know how one would police that, right? You could, in theory, right, try to prevent someone from buying season tickets, but on the secondary ticket market, it's very hard, if not impossible, to truly enforce that. And if you go to a Yankee game or where I'm from, a Knicks game, you're not handing in your social security card, right? You're not handing in your driver's license when you get access to a stadium. You're handing someone a ticket. They may be eyeballing you. Security will pat you down for a second. But even if there's a wall of like banned fans, maybe someone has a mustache, grows a beard, puts some glasses on, hat on, right? You're not necessarily going to recognize them. So in terms of its practical enforceability, it's almost impossible to do it. But then again, right, you go, we didn't mention this, but there's an incident that occurred at Madison Square Garden, about a year ago, maybe a few years ago at this point, but Charles Oakley, right, who's a public figure who's banned from going to games. That you can certainly enforce because people know who Charles Oakley is. And the second Charles Oakley sits down in the stands, you know who Charles Oakley is. But different from people like me, you, Rich and Taylor, just everyday people aren't going to be on the watch list, so to speak. So practical enforceability, I don't know. It's not practical, to put it that way.
But legally, the status, you and I go to a game, legally we're what's called a business invitee, right? And as a business invitee, we are charged with certain responsibilities. We can't just, it's not just a free-for-all because you buy a ticket to a Knicks game. And as a business invitee, legally, if you don't follow those rules that the invitor imposes, then you lose the right to return as a business invitee. So legally, I think if someone were to challenge a ban civilly, I think that would be a fairly quick dismissal of that lawsuit, right? The argument, I guess, would be you don't, as the team owner or, venue, have the right to ban me from exercising, my right to attend your game. I don't even know what that argument would be. There's obviously no, constitutional right to see the Knicks suck. If there was, then I think a lot of people's right to be violated. But I think that's a lawsuit that wouldn't go very far. I'm sure some have tried it or would try it to fight a lifetime ban. But I don't know what that legal argument would be. Do you?
I mean, short of some example that it was done as a pretext, like that the person was being,
Right.
discriminated against based on their race or their religion or some type of protected class, I don't think there's an argument because these are revocable license, just like, if you stole from a convenience store. And I don't know, I think there's an old episode of The Office where like Pam gets, she drinks too much at a Chili's or something. I think it's a Chili's, and she's banned for life. It's like, okay, like you don't really have a constitutional right to get access to Chili's, right? So yeah, these are private venues, absent some type of public forum. I don't think they have a right. So maybe, Rich, if we want to get into the weeds, maybe there are some schools like that are public institutions that maybe there could be some type of an argument, but in pure private forums like an MSG, I just don't think there's an argument there.
Yeah, for sure. So let's talk about what kind of liability there is for venues, for owners, because that's of course very interesting to our membership. So the scenario is this: there's a fan fight. We've seen a lot, for example, on the West Coast, right? We've seen a lot of examples of pretty serious brawls in the parking lots of Dodgers games involving, Giants fans for one, and there's been some pretty high-profile lawsuits resulting from that. So naturally, the first, party that you would sue is probably the person, the individual that you think perpetrated the assault or the fight. But of course, the deeper pockets and the larger defendants are, the parking lot owner, the owner of the stadium, the Dodgers, the security company, right? Any savvy plaintiff's lawyer would list all of them as potential defendants, knowing that those are more high-profile defendants. So what do you see as the civil liability for those kind of defendants?
So, Rich, as you know, we should probably mention this for purpose of the podcast. My background from a substantive area is insurance defense. So this is talking my language here. I'm a sports fan first, but I don't know. I cut my teeth on pure insurance defense, general liability cases. So talking my language here, we're talking sports and general liability, which is I think we can only do that on the SERMAPod. I think that's the pure jurisdiction of the show. There are probably two that come to mind, at least in my professional experience. Negligent security is probably going to be the top one there, right? If there was a fight, which I'll paint a picture for people a little bit. It was a fight that occurred at a Los Angeles Rams game not so long ago. It was in the last season, and there was a brawl that I as Rich as you know, I post these pictures for educational purposes. Obviously, they're entertaining, but I want people to see what's going on. And usually, if you find me on Twitter and Instagram, I'll just use the word assault, and I'll let people give their own captions. But I want people to show that this is an assault that's occurring at a public venue, and the joke is that it's negligent security. It's usually what it's going to be. The brawl in this instance that occurred at the Los Angeles Rams game was like, I don't know, like a 6-minute brawl. Like it was a long brawl. Like I couldn't even fit it into the 2-minute and 20 maximum video for Twitter. Like there were 2 parts to the video. So if you have an incident that occurs for that long of a period of time, I'm not sure how security is not on it, right? Security should be on it when they're seeing the warning signs, right? With 2 fans chirping back and forth between each other, security should intervene. There's a countless number of incidents. There was one at a Virginia Tech, North Carolina game recently where a fan was going back and forth with the fan that they ultimately got in a fight with, but where was security, right? So that's number one. And the second one, it usually goes hand in hand, right? Was there an element of over-serving, right? That was the kind of a point that I alluded to early on. There are, right, an obligation on any type of venue that's serving alcohol to not over-serve somebody. So I'm going to make a rough assessment here. We'll say the majority of the time, I'll say a word that's safe here. There's a fight at a fan arena, there's not going to be alcohol involved. It's very rare that two fans that are completely stone cold sober get into a fight where they're swinging and someone gets knocked out. But usually if you're a smart plaintiff's lawyer, as you and I have gone up against a ton of them, right? You'll think, right, if there was alcohol involved, you want to sue the venue for that particular purpose. And then you figure out who their security vendor is and you sue them for negligent security. And usually, I don't want to say usually, but at least in my experience, a lot of the security vendors are farmed out. So then you're all of a sudden dealing with 2 separate policies. You're dealing with the arena policy and you're dealing with the security policy. So that could be a separate big ticketed policy to try to collect on.
Yeah, and of course, one of the, as you referenced, one of the issues would be notice, right? I mean, these days, and that's kind of interesting. I mean, traditionally, a defense that a venue would put forth is notice that we did not have the requisite notice that a event like this would take place. But these days, to the point of this entire broadcast, that might be a harder argument to put forth given how prevalent these acts are. Now, that all being said, we're talking about a very small percentage of fans in the overall scheme of things. We're talking about, today, thousands of people will go to a Major League Baseball game, right? That's just one day. So as a proportion of all of the fans that are walking into arenas, this is a very small event. So, it's interesting to sort of think about how strong the notice defense would be. I still think it's a pretty strong defense, even though these events are maybe growing in frequency and notoriety. I still think that a strong defense would be, where's the notice on the part of the defendant? What are your thoughts on that?
I think notice is always going to be certainly important, but then again, like you have these incidents that are very public, and I think just to a point I made, like, at least the way these arenas are intended to function, right? Security is going to be aided by the eyes in the sky. There's always eyes everywhere you go. We could be talking about a casino, right? We could be talking about, which I'm sure your listeners are associated with the gaming industry, any type of sports type venue. But there are going to be security vendors that are behind the wall, right? That are telling their security personnel where to go and what, to check on this issue, check on that issue. So, if an issue persists for long enough, you can have an argument with respect to notice all you want, but I guess the frequency of these events is going to say, like, hey, you should be on notice for these. Maybe it's your duty as a venue to be on top of this, to be on top of these kind of mounting issues and address them before they become a full-out brawl that involves 5 or 6 people. And certainly just having the presence of someone associated with the arena with the appropriate tagging, special colored shirts, whatever the arena wants to use. Sometimes they use green, neon green. Sometimes that's enough to diffuse the scenario. They don't have to actually get in and get their hands dirty. So that would be, best practices, right? And I'm sure venues do all the appropriate types of training, but it's really response time is where, I think the liability is going to hold, right? If they can come in and diffuse the scenario, the question is why they did not. And those are going to make for some messy depositions and some messy, disclosures. So you can nip it at the bud early, right? That's best practices. If you can avoid the lawsuit entirely, that's a gigantic money saver at the end of the day.
Going off of that, Dan, I'll ask you, in terms of location, whether an incident occurs behind home plate or out in the parking lot, how does that affect liability for the owners?
It's a great question. So Rich alluded to it. There's this very famous incident with the San Francisco Giants and the Los Angeles Dodgers fans years ago, where the actual altercation took place in the parking lot. So I think there, if memory serves, that was still within company property or within the arena's purview, right? But there are sometimes going to be arenas that have actual security that's, with respect to the game, that's going to deal with fights in the stands or in the terminal. But there are different vendors that might have the parking lot. And then you could talk about, Rich, as you know, right? You're a Chicago guy. Wrigley Field, right? Wrigley Field is not, it's within the heart of the city. Same thing with Fenway Park. So a lot of those, streets are not going to be owned by the stadium. So then where the liability falls, it might no longer be negligent security, but you still might have the issue of over-serving and potential dram shop violations, right? That's where it would come in, to the extent that somebody got hurt leaving the arena because they were over-served, because they got into a car accident, God forbid, or anything like that. You'd still be looking at potential over-serving. But, by and large, you're going to have less liability if an act occurs off of your grounds. And that's why, the running joke is that I've seen this posted on social media a bunch, so hopefully no one gets mad at me. It's not my own joke, but that there's never been an incident that's occurred at Disney. It always tends to occur 1 inch off of Disney grounds. It's so odd how that happens. But that's the running joke as to why that would occur. Because, if something occurs offsite, the policy doesn't necessarily need to trigger or anything like that. But certainly if an over serving occurred, obviously liability could follow you as to where that ultimate incident did occur.
Yeah, it's a really great point. And, of course, one aspect that our listeners and members discuss all the time when it comes to these issues is transfer of risk, right? I mean, to what extent, when there's multiple defendants involved, does a contract exist, for example, or even if there is no contract, can one party, in this case, a venue, assert that someone else, like a security company, takes their place in terms of liability? That's always something that is of interest to us. But I want to just transition really quickly in the few minutes we have left, Dan, to something you raised earlier. You talked about, obviously, drinking as an aggravating factor. There's no question that that has an impact on unruly fan behavior. But what about gambling, right? We see more than ever the rise of gambling now that it's legal in many states. Just not far from where I'm sitting right now in my home in Lincoln Park, they're building a sports book at Wrigley Field, a standalone building inside Wrigley Field or adjacent to it. Adrian Wojnarowski of ESPN, I think I got that name correctly, ESPN Insider made this point recently where he said that the fact that you're adding gambling to the equation can't have but a aggravating effect on unruly fan behavior. What are your thoughts on that, and how does that affect liability? If someone gets hurt, are they going to now sue the sportsbook or the DraftKings or whoever?
As they say, Rich, there's no bar to the courthouse steps, so someone's going to try it. It's another question as to whether or not they can win, right? I can speak in New York. Not all states are going to be like this, but mobile gaming has been legal mobile betting has been legal since last year's Super Bowl. So I've been to, my fair share of Yankee games where I could literally place live wagers from my phone. So I can't say the uptick in incidents has occurred because of betting. Maybe you're going to have a hypothetical person, right, that lost a large amount of money betting, and they're that much more unruly. So it's the combination of the alcohol and the gambling. But the truth is, right, for years, you've had people that have been able to bet on offshore sites or some other illicit sites, and those people are not getting brought into lawsuits, at least as far as I know. So, but again, those aren't big publicly traded companies like DraftKings. So yeah, you're certainly going to have someone try. I don't know what the theory would be that I gambled and I was much more upset. So or the defendant gambled, they were much more upset. So therefore, we're bringing them in. I don't think that would create a separate well, somebody's going to sue, but I don't think that would really truly create a separate chain of liability. Someone's going to try it, and maybe there'll be some precedent out there that makes this conversation makes me seem wrong. But if I'm the insurance defense agent here, if I'm looking at a coverage case, I don't think there's any true avenue there. I think that would be pretty frivolous.
All right. Well, Dan, we've now talked a little bit about certainly some fans at sporting events who are having a bad day, probably seeing their team lose. Let's end off by maybe asking you, and I know I'm putting you on the spot here. We didn't talk about this, but you're a huge sports fan. Do you remember your worst day as a sports fan? Can you pick? I'm sure you've got many as a fan of New York teams. But can you share with our listeners maybe one bad day, not that resulted in you resorting to violence, but bad sports day following one of your favorite teams that stands out in your memory? I'll tell you mine. As a lifelong sports fan, I got way too many. You want me to go first?
Yeah, you go first.
So it's going to date me a little bit, but Dan and Taylor back in the 80s, the Montreal Expos, who was the team I grew up with, who are now the Washington Nationals, they didn't make the playoffs very often. And they were in the playoffs one year against a small team you might know as the LA Dodgers. And we called in Steve Rogers, who was our starting pitcher. He was like our ace. We called him in to relieve this one game that would have put us in the World Series. And in stepped a journeyman by the name of Rick Monday, literally a guy who'd been bouncing around a lot of teams. And Rick Monday jacked a game-winning homer for the Dodgers. We call it Blue Monday in Expos history. And that was our best chance to get to the World Series. The Dodgers went on to win the World Series. So that was, I literally remember where I was in my parents' basement watching that game. Another really bad one as a Canadian, I'll just give you the quick one, is Ben Johnson. Anyone remember Ben Johnson? Taylor, you probably don't remember him. Ben Johnson was an Olympian. He was the fastest man alive. he was battling Carl Lewis for that title. And in the 1988 Seoul Olympics, it was Ben Johnson for Canada against Carl Lewis for the United States. And the 100-meter was a huge race back then. And whoever won the 100-meter was known as the fastest man alive. Well, Ben Johnson not only beat Carl Lewis, but he looked back and raised his finger as he crossed the finish line. And I think the world record before that was 9.83. Ben Johnson won it by 9.79, which in the world of 100 meters is the equivalent of going from like 50 homers to 70. It's huge. Well, that was a great day, one of the great days of my life. 2 days later, Ben Johnson got the gold medal taken away from him because he was discovered taking steroids. And the moment when he was walking through the Seoul airport, disgraced, gold medal taken away, worst of all, the gold medal going to our nemesis, Carl Lewis. That was a huge day. I'll remember it forever. So those are a couple that spring to mind. Not that I'm still bitter or anything about that, but Dan, what do you got?
Yeah, I'll give you one. I'm happy you bought me some time to wrap my brain. I was going to say, like, New York sports have been pretty bad. I was born in the 80s, and New York sports have been pretty bad this entire run, with the exception of the New York Yankees, which I'm not a Yankees fan, so I can't really say I've enjoyed that era. But I do have one that just came to mind. No one's ever asked me this, but my uncle, huge sports fan, and my dad is as well, but my uncle is like one of these crazy sports fans that has season tickets to like an obscene amount of games, and he's giving them out to clients. But, I got to go to my fair share of New Jersey Nets games growing up. So, I must have been, I don't know, very, very little, single digits. I'm not sure how old I was, but it was getting toward the fourth quarter, and it was a very tight game against your Chicago Bulls. Are we going to say your Chicago Bulls or your Boston Celtics? Which one do we want to go with?
Boston Celtics forever. Although I am a Bulls season ticket holder, I support them, but yeah, Celtics forever.
So it was during the Michael Jordan era of basketball, and there was Nets versus Bulls. It was a really tight game, and it was getting down to the final minutes of the fourth quarter. And I was a little kid, and I'm like, Uncle Jay, got to go to the bathroom here. And he goes, he called me Danny back then. He goes, Danny, we're not going to the bathroom here. This is the fourth quarter. I'm like, Jay, I don't know what to tell you. I have to go. So if he would have lost his nephew, my mom would have been very upset. So he left. The middle, it was probably like 3 minutes left. Went to the bathroom. It took longer than expected. We came back. As we were about to get back to our seats, we were getting through the tunnel. We hear Michael Jordan hit a walk-off three into the game with like 50 points. And like, I can tell people I was there, but like I wasn't really there because I didn't see it happen. So my uncle still, it reminds me to this day, anytime I tell him anything about sports, he goes, hey, remember the time that you went to the bathroom and we missed the Michael Jordan three to win the game? I'm like, yeah, Jay, I remember that. Thank you for bringing it up for all 30 plus years.
You gotta go. You
do. It could be a liability. It could have been a liability here. Entrusting my uncle, and he didn't take care of me, but he did the right thing. But we lost the sports memory. So we'll say that's my worst. We'll put it up there.
The good news is the bathroom was probably empty. Taylor, we know we're putting you on the spot. Who's your favorite team?
Sure, Rich. So this question takes me back to my freshman year of college. My parents met in Atlanta. I was born there, and so we are all Falcons fans. And
that's the easiest layup. This question's the easiest layup in the history of questions. If you're a Falcons fan, it's so obvious.
Right. So back in 2017, being up 28-3 against the Pats and blowing that 25-point lead, that had to be the worst.
Yeah, I mean that. I would say if we asked that question, Taylor and Dan, to any Atlanta fan, period, that's got to be the answer. The biggest comeback in Super Bowl history. That's a rough one. That's a rough one. That's a good answer though. Maybe next time we have you on, we'll talk about your favorite sports memory of all time, which should be a little easier. We'll save that to next time. Taylor Weaver, thanks so much for your help. Dan Lust from Garagos from the Conduct Detrimental podcast, amazing podcast, putting out great content all the time. Thank you so much. For our digital content manager, Matt, I'm Rich Lenkov, signing off on the SERMAPod, and we'll see you next time. Thanks again, everyone. Appreciate it.